Let's go down to the swamp tonight and talk Florida Gator football. We'll start with the coaching staff first. Billy Napier enters his fourth year, carrying a 19-19 record through 3 seasons. They did recently promote Russ Callaway to offensive coordinator. He's in his third season with the Gators, working primarily with tight ends. Before that, he did spend some time with LSU as a offensive analyst. So he's a guy that a lot of LSU fans listening in will know. But diving into the quarterback position, you've got DJ Lagway, who, if he's healthy, he'll be the full-time starter. And there is so much buzz around Lagway. 5-star coming out of high school, helped him close out the season on a 6-1 to end on 6-1. So I would argue that from a true talent standpoint, he may be the best in the SEC. He's got to get some more experience, but if he can stay healthy, the sky's the limit for Lagway. Then you move over to their running back room, and you've got Jaden Ball leading the way. He's going to be exciting to watch this year. Ran for 7 touchdowns and like 675 yards last year as a freshman, averaged a little over 5 a carry. But even when you go to the number 2 back in Jacoby Jackson, he's another guy who had some success last year, 500 yards, 7 touchdowns, little over 5 yards a carry. They're going to be deep in that running back room with the 1-2 punch. Then you move over to wide receivers where, they got some good news today. Gene Wilson was back this week in practice. Aiden Mazzell was back today in practice. Michael Sturdivant from UCLA is, joined the team this year. That's going to be a pretty solid top 3. They do have Dallas Wilson battling some injury, the last week and a half of camp. But since he's gone down, you've had 2 other freshmen really step up, and Vernal Brown and Takara has really stepped up too. They've got 5 or 6 guys, even if Wilson's missing some time, who are going to be deep in that wide receiver room. Moving over to the offensive line, it kind of starts with their center, Jake Slaughter. He's, first team preseason, going to be a really good anchor for that offensive line. They also return a couple other starters, and they've got three seniors, a junior, and a sophomore starting. The sophomores at right tackle and Bryce Lovett. He played a lot for them last year. So they're going to be in good position on the offensive line too. It's really going to allow them to run well. And, if DJ Lagway's healthy week 1 and stays healthy all season, I think the sky's the limit for this offense. Lagway's practicing some in fall camp. Other times he's not. So if they have to turn to Harrison Bailey or Aiden Warner, things could get a little messy there. Harrison's kind of been all over the place. Tennessee, UNLV, Louisville. So if he's QB1 week 1, it's going to be interesting to see. I think they'll have to lean on the run game a lot more if Lagway's not good to go week 1. What do you think of their offense?
I think they got a lot of talent on their offense. Florida finished the year 8-4 and finished strong, but I don't know that people really. I mean, people are talking about they're going to be good this year and that, but I don't know that people really realize how much offensive talent they have. I agree with you on Lagway. To me, they have the best running back duo in Ja'Cory Jackson and Jaden Ball in the conference. And then they do have good skill position people at wide receiver. So I look at their offense and I think, they could be totally complete. The question is Lagway, and everybody's talking about it because he's set for the spring. Everybody knows it's the shoulder. He'll practice 3 days and then he'll set and rest. So what's that going to be for the season? And if you play a couple of tough games back to back, what's that going to be? Is he going to set for the week? What's that do with the timing and the passing game? Those are the things that I think are what they're going to have to sort out. I don't think it's a talent issue. And again, most teams would love to have their offensive line. I think, Texas A&M maybe has a better offensive line. Texas has a lot of talent on the offensive line. Auburn has a lot of experience. Georgia has a lot of talent. Bama has talent at offensive line. But I would probably put Florida second behind A&M. So their offense, I think, is really good. I like what Napier does from a standpoint of if his team he establishes the run. He still has a little bit of old school football in that him and Kirby kind of in that Saban mold. They're going to establish the run and dominance through that. And I still think that's a great way to win football games.
Yeah, I agree. There's, especially if Lagway is still dealing with some shoulder issues early on, but he's good to play. If he only throws the ball 25 times a game and they're running with success 35, 40 times, like I think that's going to be the recipe while he's still dealing with some issues to kind of, continue to bring him back slowly if he's able to play and lean on the run game because they've got two really good running backs. And then one guy I did leave out of the tight end room is Hayden Hanson, who I think is going to be one of the better tight ends in the SEC. Didn't have a ton of yardage. I think, 12 catches, maybe 160 yards and a touchdown. But he is on the Mackey Award watch list this year. So he's going to be, if there's still some shoulder pain, he's going to be a target for Lagway a lot early on. I think you're going to see a lot of running and a lot of, short pass plays and let the guys try and create from there on the offensive side.
I agree. I think so.
Yeah, and this is definitely the best offense Napier's had since he's taken over Florida. So,
By
with
far.
them finishing off strong last year, this is a team that could be really dangerous this year.
Yeah, it's by far the best offense. I mentioned Ball, but in my opinion, Ball is the best running back in the SEC. If I'm a coach in the SEC, he's the guy I want. Just from the standpoint, he's big, he's 220. He can hit the home run, he can get outside, and he can run between the tackles. He's a complete back. So him behind that offensive line will open up things.
Yeah, definitely. The offensive line's only going to make him look even better.
Yes.
He could be a 12 to 1400 yard guy with 16 to 18 touchdowns this year.
Yeah, I think he could be. And then I think you've got Jackson there that'll come in and, finish with 400 or 500 yards behind him.
Their offense is definitely I would put them top 5 in the SC offensively.
Very well could be. To me, there's 5, 6 offenses that I think have the potential of being really good, but they're there. They don't have any holes on offense. I mean, to your point, and that's what I was trying to kind of say earlier is I don't think people are respecting enough what they have on offense. I think you take quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end. There's no holes there. Offensive line, there's no holes there. So you put them right up there with Texas, who doesn't have really any holes. Um, LSU has the skill players and that line's got to develop. I think those would be the 3 top offenses right off the top of your head. If Simpson comes along with Bama, then I think you throw them in there. But there's unknowns. Georgia could be in that top 5 too. But they Gunnar Stockton at quarterback. So if he develops and plays, then I think there's your top 5, and Florida's definitely in that top 5 group, or maybe top 2 or 3.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then you move over to the defensive side and a lot of talent again, starting up front. You've got Tyreek Sapp, George Gums, and you have Caleb Banks, coming back. Those guys as a group accounted for 16 and a half sacks for the Gators last year. So they're going to be really good up front. I do question their depth a little bit. LJ McCray is been battling some injury up front through fall camp. They have some talent. One player I think Brendan Brett, the transfer at defensive tackle from Baylor, didn't do a ton at Baylor, but he did have a couple pass deflections last year and a sack or two. He adds a good piece of depth for them, but Tyreek Sapp, I think, is going to be really good. Coming off a 7 sack, two forced fumble season, 13 tackles for loss. He's kind of where it all starts up front. George Gums is, going to continue to develop. He was, solid for him last year, 8 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. What I'm really excited about is their linebacker room. You're probably going to have Grayson Howard and Miles Graham as the two starters there. But a guy that I really like, and I've heard a lot of praise of him in fall camp, is Aaron Childs. They have him at the number 3 freak on their team behind Ball and I want to say Tyreek Sapp or somebody on the defensive line. He's been starting a little bit with Grayson Howard limited this week, like in their scrimmage the other day. So he's a guy who is going to be a rotation piece to start the season, but I wouldn't be surprised out of the top 3 linebackers if he's number 2 in tackles when it's all said and done. He's a guy I'm really high on. And then yeah, you've got a little bit of youth in the linebacker room too with Miles Johnson and Ty Jackson. And Jaden Robinson's gonna have some opportunity there. So I really like their linebacker room too. When you move to their secondary, they do return Jordan Castell and Bryce Thornton and Sharif Denson. Those are 3 guys who have been in the program going into year 3 now. Castell is probably the guy who sticks out the most to me out of that group. I do like Bryce Thornton too. He had 3 interceptions last year, but I think Castell's going to kind of be the leader in the secondary this season. Freshman who, has been limited a little bit the last week or so, Drake Stubbs. He's a guy who's going to be in there too deep, true freshman. So I know they've got some really, really big expectations for him down the road. And then you'll have Devin Moore and Dijon Johnson likely as your 2 starting quarterbacks. Johnson's also been banged up in fall camp. But you've also got Cormani McLean, who's fighting for the spot there. Yeah, he's a kid who went to Colorado out of high school and then transferred over to Florida. He's a kid who went to Lakeland High School. So I know Florida was really in on him out of high school. And now that he's back, I know they're excited. And, he's a guy who's going to have a role this year. Outside of those 3, you've got just some depth pieces, some guys who still need to develop. But I really like their safety room for sure. With Drake Stubbs is going to be a name we talk about for the next couple years at that safety spot. Yeah, they're in kind of like their offense, at least from the starting side. They don't have too many holes. I do question, some of their depth on the line and at the defensive end spot and at the cornerback spot a little bit. I think they are really strong at safety, but my biggest question would be the rotation on the defensive line for this team.
Yeah. So I think they're solid. And one thing about this group is they've played a lot of games. There's so much experience on their defense from Caleb Branch, Sapp, George Gomes. You mentioned the linebackers, Pup Howard and Miles Graham. In the secondary, you've got Devin Moore, Castile, Bryce Thornton. Those guys have played a lot of games. So I do think their cornerback room is their weakest part of their defense. There's talent there. And I do think depth is the question. Do they lose some people? The linebacker room with LJ McCray and Childs behind Miles Graham and Howard, that's probably the one area that they do have a lot of depth is at linebacker. But the defensive line and the secondary, not safety, but again, the quarterback, room and the defensive line, I think, is where they have to avoid injuries. And when I look at their defense, I reference they got a lot of experience. They played a lot of games. Sapp is an elite type player. Giles is an elite athlete, and Caleb Branch is one of, if not the best, defensive tackle in the SEC. So you've got those guys, Caleb Banks. I mean, you've got those guys that stand out, but then I look at the rest of their defense and I'm like, those are just really good, solid players. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I don't see difference makers at every position. So I think, when you look at, when I say, okay, project what their defense could be, I think they're going to be a nice defense, but I think they'll be in that somewhere in that 30 to 45 range as far as their total stats for the year and where they end up as far as a total defense. I don't see them in a league or but again, you put that with that offense. I do think their offense could be elite. I think their offense could be top 20, maybe top 15. So when you put top 15 offense with a top 35, 40 defense, you're going to win a lot of games. Again, they got a tough schedule. I know you're fixing to hit that next, but
Yeah, one thing on the defense outside of the players, the co-coordinator model with you've got Ron Roberts, Robert Bela, and Vinny Sinceri, all with the co-coordinator title. I've seen it with two quite a bit. I don't know how many times I've seen three guys carry the co-DC. So I do wonder a little bit, like how does that really gonna work for them? You almost have too many Chiefs on the defensive side and not enough Indians.
yeah, certainly it could turn out to be that way. I think if you look at how they managed the room last year, Ron Roberts eventually took that, even though there was co-DCs last year. Ron Roberts really took the role over. So I see him as the leader in that DC room. And then I think someone like Vinny Sinceri, they put that title with him, to give him an increase. And he's someone that down the road could follow Roberts. Roberts has been coached a lot of places, very well respected. Dave Aranda liked him. He spent some time at Auburn, but he's been a lot of places. He's 3-4, and he likes to mix defenses and very, add some complexity and rush the passer. So I think he's the one that will lead the room. But to your point, do those other guys start wanting some of that authority and want to make some of the calls? And does that develop and break any chemistry from there?
Yeah, they did finish the season off really strong last year. Their last four games of the season, they played LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State, and Tulane. And in those four games, they had 38 tackles for loss, 18 sacks, and 12 takeaways to end the season. So that gives me, a little bit more optimism with their defense, even though they don't have playmakers at every position. Yeah, they're going to be pretty fundamentally sound. And I'm with you on Ron Roberts. He's a guy I like a lot. Yeah, I met him at a coach's clinic a couple years ago when he was still at Auburn, and really smart defensive mind. So that was a great hire when they brought him on a couple years ago.
You mentioned the pressure and how they played late in the season. Caleb Banks is where he really turned it on. He had 7 pressures right up the middle against LSU and was a big part of us not playing very well against Florida, and we couldn't sustain drives down there. They again, there's talent there, and Banks may be the best defensive tackle in all of college football.
Yeah, no, I agree on that. They had a tough schedule last year. A lot of people, myself included, was predicting 5-7, and honestly thought it might be the end of the Billy Napier saga there. But they really rallied after that loss to Texas. Won the next three regular season, then absolutely throttled Tulane in that bowl game to really end on a high note and have a lot of momentum. Unfortunately, though, for them, the schedule doesn't get much easier this year. So jumping into that, they do get a tune-up game on August 30th with Long Island coming into the swamp. That's a game I think they win. The following week, they've got South Florida. And I do think that for, a quarter, maybe 20 minutes, that's going to be a close game. South Florida seems to really play those in-state rivals well, but I just think Florida has too many weapons to, have that game be close at the end. Florida's probably going to win by, 3 or 4 scores when it's all said and done. And then September 13th, they travel to Baton Rouge, and I know that the Tigers have this game circled. Uh, yeah, with everything that LSU brings back on the offensive side, added a couple transfer receivers to that room and a new look defense from what I'm hearing from fall camp. I think LSU wins that one. And then Florida goes on the road the following week to Miami, but I think they're going to be ready to fight in that one. So I do have them beating Miami, which puts them at 3-1. They get a bye week, and then they start October with the Longhorns coming to town. I, unlike most, think this is going to be a really good game. I haven't looked at the slate of games yet for that week, but I think this one has the potential to be college game day. I think it's going to be back and forth, two really fundamentally sound teams with a lot of talent. But I just think Texas is going to be a little too much. I've got Texas winning a close one. And then just like when Florida loses to LSU, they play Miami. Florida plays Texas, then goes on the road against A&M. I think it's going to be another revenge game for them. I think the loss to Texas is really going to stick with them. I think they're going to bounce back and they're going to beat Texas A&M at Kyle Field. And then they do get another easy one, October 18th with Mississippi State coming to town. Mississippi State is way behind everybody else in the conference from a talent and experience level. So I do have Florida winning that one. So then they get another bye week, and then they've got the Georgia Bulldogs coming to town. I think Georgia's going to be a really good team this year. And I think this is another one that's going to be really close. I'm breaking it down to, I think a Kirby Smart coach team makes a couple more plays. So I do have Georgia winning this one. So with 4 games left, I've got the Gators at 5-3. They travel to Kentucky the next week. I think they win that one pretty easily. Then they travel to Ole Miss the following week, which I think is also going to be a tough game, but I'm rolling with the Gators in this one. I, don't know what Austin Simmons is going to look like for Ole Miss yet. And I think, this is about the time last year that Gator defense got rolling. They're going to be good all year, but I think they kind of turn it up towards the end of the year, knowing that there's the potential that a 9-3 SEC team gets in. So, Ole Miss is probably going to be ranked at this point. So if they go up there and upset them, that's only helping their playoff chances. Then they get Tennessee the following week, at home. So I'm rolling with the Gators. The Swamp's a tough place to play. Kind of like Ole Miss. Tennessee's a solid team, but they've got some question marks at the quarterback position and a few other places. So I think Florida wins that one. And then, they've got Florida State to end the season. So they're going to be 8-3 at that point. And I'm rolling with Florida here in this one. I think Florida State's got to be more competitive than they were last year. But at the same time, I just don't think Florida State's good enough to hang with Florida. So I've got them going 9-3. I would put their ceiling at 10-2, where they could pick up potentially that Georgia game, if they really execute well. But I think 9-3 is a good area for them to be in. It's again some continued growth from last year, and then whether they're in the playoff at 9-3, they certainly have a little bit of a resume to put them in. But they finish out with a good bowl win, and they finish 10-3, and I think that's great for the trajectory of this team under Napier.
I think if they go 9-3, you have to put them in the playoffs. I don't care if there's 10-2 teams, 11-1 teams. They do. If they don't have the toughest schedule in football this year, there's not many more. And they had one of the toughest, if not the toughest, last year. So if you win games, let's say you win at Miami, you win at Texas A&M, you beat Tennessee at home, you win at Ole Miss. That's a heck of a season, even if you lose to teams like Texas, LSU, and Georgia. Texas, LSU, and Georgia could be three top 10 teams on your schedule. I think Florida and LSU and a couple other teams have seven ranked teams if you let's look at the preseason top 25. I do think there'll be 9-3 teams make the playoffs this year. I think there'll be at least two 9-3 teams make the playoffs this year. And I don't think you're going to see an 11-1 Indiana type team or a 10-2 SMU type team make the playoffs this year. And I reference those teams not because of the name of the teams, but the schedule that they played last year. If Indiana would have beat a top 15, top 10 team, totally different feelings about it. And the same with SMU. I think you're gonna when you get to those last 4 or 5 weeks of the season this year, I think the talking heads, ESPN, and I think Saban will lead the chant because I know he believes in strength of schedule, and there's going to be a lot of people follow him and his comments because he obviously carries a lot. His voice carries a lot of opinion. I think you're going to see that follow, and I don't think the committee is going to take a 10-1 team that hasn't beat a top 20 team over a 9-3 team that has beaten 2 to 3 top 20 teams and maybe lost to top 10 teams. I think you're going to see it transition. It won't go totally like basketball, but I think you're going to start seeing that. And rightfully so. Over the years, you've had basketball teams that have quality losses lose to top five teams and they might get a number one seed. I think the same thing has to be considered in football. You cannot penalize a teams for playing a tough schedule, or if you do, you're going to see teams just go to that. They'll play four cupcakes out of conference, and I don't think the TV money wants that. I don't think the networks want that, and I really honestly don't think the schools and the best teams and programs don't want that. I think the best programs want to be battle tested, and I think they would prefer to go 9-3 and be battle tested and be in the playoffs than go 11-1 and just play one or two tough teams that you got to get up for. So I think 9-3, if that's where they land, and they have talent. If Lagway stays healthy, they could do that. I think if they
Yeah,
hit 9-3, they got to be in the playoffs.
yeah, no, I agree. And I constantly hear Big Ten coaches and media. Well, we play 9 conference games. Looking at Florida's schedule, 6 of their 8 SEC games are going to be against ranked opponents. Miami's likely going to be ranked in week 4 when they play. And depending on how things shape up for Florida State, they could be ranked, which would give them what, 8 ranked teams that they play this year. Show me a Big Ten team that plays 8 ranked opponents.
No, you don't. The Big Ten's a top-heavy league. You have Ohio State, you have Michigan, you have Penn State, and then you have other teams that'll eventually be up in that group. But you look at the historical side of the Big Ten, and I'm not talking this year because Illinois is a good team this year, but historically they're not a top 20, not a top 25 program. Yes, they played 9 games, but when you have Maryland, Purdue, Northwestern, Rutgers, Indiana, Illinois, those type teams, and again, I'm not talking about today's Indiana or today's Illinois, but you're going to have 5, 6, 7 teams in that league that are not top 40 teams. So it's a big difference. Sure, at the bottom of the SEC, you're going to have 3 or 4 teams that are not going to be in that top 40 group. But in the Big Ten, you're going to have 6, 7 teams that are not going to be in that top 40 group. So, what's a ninth conference game? I mean, you look at a lot of the SEC teams; they play an out of conference team that's every bit the equivalent of that ninth conference game in the Big Ten. You have Bama playing Florida State. I know Florida State's an unknown. You have Florida plays Florida State and Miami. LSU plays Clemson. Oklahoma plays Michigan. There's a Big Ten matchup right there. That's right off the bat. Texas plays at Ohio State. So the SEC may only play 8 conference games, but the conference is just much deeper. There's just no question about it. And a lot of your top SEC teams play a quality team out of conference. I don't think I know they want to chirp that stuff, and I know the Big Ten is really trying to push hard to get 4 teams in, regardless of how they end the season, and that kind of fizzled. And I don't think that's deserving. I think let's play it out, but let's look at strength of schedule. Let's see how it plays out. If you're a 10-2 Big Ten team and you've only beaten 1 or 2 top 20 teams, and you beat a bunch of other guys like Indiana last year, then I'm not sure you need to be in.
Yeah, I think you can make the argument for probably 10 to 12 SEC teams who have a realistic shot to get into the college football playoff entering the season. When you look at the Big Ten, I see maybe 4, 5 at the most out of that conference. Same with the ACC. Yeah, the ACC, I'm actually probably a little lower on this year. Clemson's going to be a really good team. Outside of that, I think SMU takes a big step back. Yeah, so they don't have a ton of horses. You get to the Big 12. I don't even know who you pick as the favorite in that league this year.
Yeah, I think, Big Ten, Ohio State, I think is an unknown from a favorite standpoint. They could be. Penn State has everything but in my opinion, Drew Aller is an average quarterback. I know everybody wants to talk about him, but I've never seen him play well in a big game. And so, I have question marks there. And then I do think Michigan's going to be better, but again, is Bryce Underwood ready to lead them to a conference championship? That's an
And then
unknown.
they do have Oregon now.
Yep.
Oregon's a team that I think of. I don't think Michigan's going to be ready yet. And then I look, Illinois is going to be a solid team this year, but I don't think they make the playoff.
But they're if you look at their schedule, Illinois is a solid team, but they're ones with a soft schedule. So to me, if they lose too, then that should knock them out. I do think Oregon's, will be in the top of that league somewhere. Dante Moore, though, is a guy that I'm just, I want to see him. He's kind of like Ty Simpson of Bama. They both may end up being really good players, but I got to see it because when Moore was at UCLA, he didn't really play much. And granted, he was a true freshman, so that's fine, and it's 2 years later, so give him time to grow. But I want to see that. I want to see what he's going to do and perform. So Illinois will be well coached. Belima does a good job coaching the fundamentals. They'll be a solid team. But I just don't see more than 2 to 3 teams out of that league this year that should get in. And I would put Penn State as a team that should get in, and then I would put the possiblies with Ohio State and Oregon. I agree with you. Michigan's probably still another year away.
Yeah, I agree. And then, in the ACC, I think Clemson's got to be your favorite to win. I don't dislike Miami by any means. Just I don't know, with them playing so early in the season in September against Florida, I feel like that loss to Florida could derail them a little bit. And then after that, I mean, you do have SMU, another team, I think takes a step back. So, they're probably a one bid league this year. And then you go over to the Big 12, and I guess you got Arizona State and Kansas State. Texas Tech could be a dark horse to win that, but they're another one bid league, I think. So, you'll get your Boise State or UNLV in. Those are the two group of fives I think have the best shot. Notre Dame will probably be a team that gets in. So that leaves 8 spots possibly for your Big Ten and your SEC. I could see the SEC getting 5 or 6 in to 2 or 3 from the Big Ten. I know the national media would hate that, but you're going to have Texas, Georgia, LSU, Alabama, South Carolina, Florida, Texas A&M, possibly Ole Miss and Tennessee, all really fighting. I know Oklahoma's preseason 18. I'm kind of counting them out on that. You get 7 teams who could potentially be competing for 6 spots in the college football playoff. Now, I think 5's a more realistic number, but if Oregon falls apart this year and has 3 losses, I gotta think 3-loss Ole Miss or a 3-loss South Carolina get the nod over a 3-loss Oregon.
I absolutely think so. Again, if you're a South Carolina who plays a decent schedule, or again a Florida or an Alabama, I just think there's several teams in the SEC that could be 3-loss teams that are going to play tough, tough schedules. Unless you could be a 3-loss team. So I just think that you could, if they play those tough schedules. And to your point, I think if you're a 2-loss or a 3-loss Big Ten team, depending on who you play, it's questionable. Now, if you're a 2-loss Big Ten team and you've played Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, okay. But if you're a 2-loss Big Ten team and you've played two of those teams, and then fill the schedule with some of those, again, the Northwesterns, the Purdue's, the Marylands, the Rutgers, your teams that are typically 500, I just don't see it. I agree with you. The ACC is probably a one big league unless Miami, finishes 11-1 and beats a team like Florida, or unless SMU runs the thing again and goes 11-1. But I think they have to be 11-1 this year to get in. And then the Big 12 could be interesting. I think they're probably a one big league. And I think I see them as a team, as a league that you have Arizona State, you have Texas Tech, Iowa State. You have some BYU is another team, depending on their quarterback situation, how that falls out since the young man that got in trouble that went to Tulane that started for him last year. So we'll see how that rolls. But I think the Big 12 is a league that you could see a lot of those teams beat up on each other, and they all have 2 to 3 losses. And the only way that that league gets more than one team in is if you go into that Big 12 championship with 2 one-loss teams, or a team that's undefeated and a team with 1 loss. I don't see that. But Iowa State's another team in that league that always plays well and wins games, and they'll beat somebody.
Yeah, they always, they're a team that wins a game or two that they shouldn't, but they also always lose a game or two that they shouldn't. Like I'm looking at their schedule last year. Who did they? Yeah, they lost to Kansas and Texas Tech back to back. Those were 2 games they should have won. Did they lose? They did. They lost to Arizona State. That's right. Or no, they lost. Yeah, to Arizona State. I forgot that they played for their conference championship this year.
Yes.
For some reason, I was thinking K-State was in it last year.
Everybody favored K-State, but they didn't. Again, there was a logjam at the top, and tiebreakers fell out. And again, you're going to have Kansas is another team that I don't think they'll get in there, but they could upset some teams. So we'll see.
Yeah. West Virginia is another team out of that league. I mean, I don't think they're good this year, but West Virginia is a program that I like. Maybe next year or the year after, once they get a few things in line. Now, West Virginia is a team that is just littered with transfers all over the field. Their offense, they're too deep as I think like 17 of the 22 are transfers. Their defense is 16 of the 22 are transfers. So they're a team that really went big in the transfer portal. So, a lot of those guys you don't know about because some of them are, transfers from smaller schools. So, West Virginia may show that they've got a little life in them this year. And looking at WVU's schedule, they play Pitt, Kansas, Utah, BYU, UCF, TCU, Houston, Colorado, and then they end the season with Arizona State and Texas Tech. But if they get some things moving, that's not an incredibly challenging schedule for them this year.
I think West Virginia. I see West Virginia Tech, Texas Tech. I mentioned Kansas, and then Oklahoma State as teams that will finish in that 7-5 range, but they will beat the top team. They will beat top teams in that league. The teams in that league will have to avoid losing to those teams if they're going to have a chance at the playoffs.
And you can never count old Mike Gundy and the Cowboys out of anything.
That's right. He will point his pistols, and well, let's see if he brings the mullet back this year.
I know he may need to.
He certainly won with it. So yeah,
Yeah.
bring the mullet back.
Well,
So let's jump over to the skill positions in the SEC. And as I looked at the skill position teams, the teams with the best skill positions, just looking at the overall skill positions, to me it was very interesting to look at it. When I look at it, I see the best skill position rooms at the top of the league, which to me that's interesting. So Texas is just loaded with this at every position with a skill position. You have Jack Andres at tight end, the transfer. Then you have C.J. Baxter, Jeremy Wisner at running back, then DeAndre Moore, Khalil Lockett, the freshman, who I think by the middle of the season will be in their top 3 wide receiver group. Emmett Mosley, who's injured. I think they're in that top room. We mentioned Florida, with Jaden Ball, Jackson at running back, Eugene Wilson, Michael Sturdivant, Aiden Mizell at wide receiver. I think they're at the top of the league. Georgia, people aren't talking about their wide receivers. They forget they had transfers at that wide receiver room this year. Their best 3 are going to be transfers. You have Noah Thomas from A&M, Kobe Young from Miami, and then Zachariah Branch from USC. Dylan Bell, probably their 4th wide receiver. Last year was in their top 2 or 3. And then their running back room is just loaded. You have Nate Frazier, Chauncey Bowens, Bo Walker, and then the Illinois transfer, Josh McCray, who's been kind of MIA in practice so far. But whether he decides to get on the bus or not, they got 3 others that can roll with it. And then you have Cash, who catches it out of the backfield for them. So again, just a lot of depth there. They got good tight ends at Georgia with Delp, and so it's just a complete room there. And then you go to LSU, you've got wide receivers. There's a lot of depth there. Chris Hilton, Barian Brown, Nick Anderson, Aaron Anderson, Xavier Thomas. That's 5 wide receivers. And then when you go to the tight end room, you've got Trades Green and Bauer Sharp. Just a full room from a passing game standpoint. And then running back, Caden Durham and Harlem Berry. I do think we see Berry step into that number 2 role and give them a lot out of the backfield in the passing game. And so I just a loaded skill position room. And those teams all, have quarterbacks, Lagway, Arch Manning, Nuss. The one that's still got to be proven there is Stockton at Georgia. You jump over to, both teams in the state of Alabama have great rooms from a skill position standpoint. You got Alabama with Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, who has been proven at Washington and then at Bama last year. Isaiah Horton, the transfer from Miami. Again, and then they have a lot of depth in that running back room too with Jam Miller, who's been spoken a lot about for his leadership and what he's bringing to them this year. Then you have Daniel Hill, who's a big running back that weighs about 240. Now some say he's 260, but and then when you read about how he's practicing, he's catching balls out of the backfield. So when you listen to what they're saying, he's going to bring a lot and probably be that number 2 running back. And you still have Richard Young, and then the freshman that from Mississippi that's Deer, Ikea Deer, who is going to be there with him. So just a lot of skill position players there. Ty Simpson, again, there's the question, is he going to elevate to that? But man, he's got a lot of tools around him. And then, jump over to Auburn, same thing. You have Malcolm Simmons, Eric Singleton, Cam Coleman, who's maybe the most talented wide receiver in the SEC, Horatio Fields, a transfer. And then the running back room is kind of a running back room by committee there at Auburn. You've got Austin Cobbs, Durrell, and Mabson, the freshman. So again, a lot of really good skill players that can beat you. And the question there is Jackson Arnold. Can he step his level up to feed all those guys? Again, he doesn't have to be great. Him or Simpson, neither one have to be great. They just have to be good. They got so much around them. If they can just be consistent and move the chains with those weapons. And both teams, I mean, you got Singleton, who's a 4-2 guy, can get over the top. Ryan Williams is, again, 4-2 guy that can beat anybody over the top. So, again, your best teams in the league all have good skill positions. Another interesting skill position room to me, 2 more that I would put that I would consider these teams as 8-4, 9-3 type teams, but really good skill positions. People don't think about it, but Missouri lost a lot at their skill positions, but they have it right behind them. They got a transfer in Kevin Coleman from Mississippi State, but then they have Joshua Manning, who's a junior but was a 4-star, and then Marquise Johnson, who's a 10-4 guy who they're really high on. So you got three really good wide receivers there, and Ahmad Hardy, the transfer running back. So that was the number one transfer in the portal from a running back position. And then they got a freshman that I really like out of Ohio. It was a 4-star in Marquise Davis. And then Jamal Roberts is a short yardage running back. So again, you got a lot of skill position players that they can mix up. The question there is going to be, again, the quarterback, can Bo Pula or Sam Horn step up to lead that group in that skill position room? And then finally, Ole Miss is the last team that I would put that has a lot of special players in the skill position room. Deshaun Stribling, Harrison Wallace, who was a transfer from Penn State, Caden Lee, Daquan Wright. And then you look at their running backs, again, kind of a running back by committee, but they have a lot with Logan Diggs, Kawan Lacey, and then for another freshman, Shakai Mills Davis, that I will think will be no, Shakai Mills King. I think he will end up being the starter midway point at that running back position. He played well in the scrimmage this past weekend. Same with Marquise Davis at Missouri. So, I think it's interesting. Your top teams in the SEC, it's a line of scrimmage league, and it always has been and always will be. But your top 10 teams also have great skill rooms. You look at all those teams, there's tremendous depth, wide receiver, running back, there's tight end, plenty of people to throw the ball to. A lot of NFL guys, and just about all those guys that I mentioned at some point in their career will play in the league. And then to me, that's going to separate the teams in the SEC this year versus the teams that I think are going to just fall into the next level. You look at the bottom of the league, not trying to be critical of any team, but just being realistic. Arkansas has some good running backs with Mike Washington and Russell, but their wide receiver room's a huge question mark. You have Mississippi State with Fluff at running back, and again, huge question marks about what they're going to have at wide receiver. We have, again, a team that everybody's talking a lot about, Oklahoma, who has a lot of good players on their defense and maybe the best defensive line in the league. But what do they have at the skill position group? To me, there's a big gap there. They have Deion Burks at wide receiver and then Santanga that transferred from Arkansas. But both of those guys are smaller guys. Santanga has got some speed, but he's not known to beat people deep because he's not very big. So, you put a 6'2" guy on him that can run, his length is going to prohibit him from getting past him, that reach. I question, what can Oklahoma do if their skill position players don't really step up? That's going to put so much pressure on John Mateer. You have Jay Knott in the running back room, who 2 years ago was really good, but last year was average. And then after that, you don't really have a lot in the running back room. So in Kentucky, same scenario, a lot of young guys at wide receiver, and then running backs, solid guys, but that's it. And then, a team that we think is going to be good, South Carolina, who has a great quarterback, but will their skill position players step up to what he needs them to be? So I think that's the question mark when what separates the top half of the SEC to the bottom half of the SEC. Everybody in the SEC has people that can play in the line of scrimmage in the NFL. But does everybody in the SEC have players at those skill positions that are going to play there? And I think the 7 or 8 best teams in the league that are going to battle it out for those 4 to 5 playoff spots, you're going to look and you're going to say it's because they have a loaded skill position room that they can be balanced, they can run the ball, they can pass the ball, and they can hit a home run, whether it's a handoff or a back out of the backfield running a wheel route or a wide receiver taking a slant pass and going the distance. That's to me was just an interesting, look at just what's going to separate the top teams in the league.
Yeah, I agree. I think, from a top of the line standpoint, I do think LSU, Texas, and Georgia are probably the top three. Georgia with Gunnar Stockton, a bit of an unknown. Those would be like my three favorites to reach the playoff. And let's just say there's 5 SEC teams that get in. You know, I almost have Bama on the outside looking in there. I kind of like the complete package of Florida and Auburn ahead of Bama on the skill position area with the and I guess Jackson Arnold's a bit of an unknown. I'm just a little higher on him than I am Ty Simpson. If you get 5 teams in, there's the potential that Alabama could be that 6th team on the outside looking in this year.
Yes. And again, it's when you look at the total group of the rooms, like you mentioned, Florida is a team that if they can navigate that tough schedule and they finish 9-3, they can get in. Auburn, same thing. If they go 10-2, 9-3, especially if they were to go, let's say Auburn goes 9-3, they have home games against Georgia and home game against Alabama. And if they were to somehow beat both of those teams in Jordan Hare and go 9-3, you've probably got to consider them to get in. So they could. Now, I think Bama's floor is 9-3. Now, to your point, let's say you got 4 or 5 teams that are 9-3 in the SEC. Again, if Florida goes 9-3, they're getting in over anybody. You could have Florida,
Yeah.
LSU, Bama, Auburn at 9-3. That schedule that Florida plays, they're in over anybody. And then depending upon how the games play out, if LSU goes to Bama, they got to play a close game there if they go 9-3 and Bama goes 9-3. But with LSU playing Clemson, then that first game that might elevate them with just that strength of schedule. But I do think there's going to be 9-3 teams get in. So it's really going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And I agree that Simpson is a big question at Bama. I know, the early things you're reading, the coaching staff is saying good things about him. I just go back to that completion percentage 55, 56% is what he's completed in the 2 years when he's played. And then that's even in mop up duty. So to me, he's got to prove to be more than that. And with the talent that he has, he should be. There's no reason with the guys that he has around him, he shouldn't be a 60% pass completion guy and be able to hit some over the top guys when you've got Ryan Williams. Now, one thing we talk about Williams, and he's a great player, but he did have a lot of drops last year. And if you look at the last 4 or 5 games, I think the length and the physicality of the SEC schedule impacted him towards the latter part of the season. That being said, I don't see any problem with him being elite again this year at all.
Yeah, no, I think he's gonna have a good year. But yeah, he was, in my opinion, a little bit more of a highlight reel player last year. I can't remember what game it was early in the season where he flipped it up and, made the catch around the defender. I mean, that was an ESPN top 10 play. I think it was number one that following day. I think between the physicality and then there were a few games where it looked like he got frustrated too, like wasn't being targeted at times. And then when he was, I think the wear and tear played a factor. But, when you're a receiver like that, if you go a quarter without seeing a football thrown your way, like, especially with how young he was, wear and tear, learning college, like, you're going to lose a little bit of that focus. So I think they really need to, make sure they target him a little more too this season. Because there were a lot of plays. I remember watching some tape where, he's wide open and Milrose checking it down to a running back or something. And, you can kind of see the frustration on, the body language of Ryan Williams not happy at all certain times last year.
That Milrow effects is another thing that makes me question Ty Simpson because there were some games Milrow last year just was not good. Their fan base would tell you first. They were certainly ready after that Michigan game for a transition at quarterback. And again, if Ty Simpson is that guy, why didn't they go to him at Oklahoma? Why didn't they go to him in the Michigan game? Games that they could have won with just a little bit of offensive play. So that does, again, make me question Simpson. So, but
Yeah.
maybe, let's see how he plays week 1 at Florida State and let's go from there. The one thing, if I'm a Bama fan though, I don't want to just go to Florida State and see no interceptions and we're 16 for 25 for 198 yards and we win a game and we are solid. If I'm a Bama fan, I want to see 18, 19 out of 25, 26, 250, 270 yards minimum. Maybe again, no interceptions, 2 or 3 touchdowns. I want to see him make an impact with my offense. Again, Ryan Williams, you mentioned him and his gracefulness. I grew up as a Pittsburgh Steeler fan, and the comparison that I hear broadcasters make that I think is the perfect comparison for Ryan Williams. And I love this guy growing up. He was one of my favorite football players, and that's Lynn Swan. You talk about the balance on the sideline where you tip the ball up. That was the type of plays Swan would make. He would go up on the sidelines, and somehow he had enough body control to bring his feet down and stay in bounds. Williams had one of those type catches last year in that Vanderbilt game. And then I think the Georgia game is where he tipped it up and right after Georgia took the lead. But I know he made a long, he caught a long ball down the sideline for a touchdown pass the very next play against Georgia. I know that for a fact. I do love the Lynn Swan comparison, and I think that's, who he plays to. So we'll see. But again, skill position guys, it's going to be an interesting season. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch those top 7, 8 teams with those skill position guys and see how they play.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Tennessee the last couple of years has been so stacked on the offensive side of the ball, and this year they're a team that I think most know are going to take a step back to some degree. I know they had a few quarterback issues with the transfer, but they're a team that like doesn't excite me at all looking at their wide receiver or their running back.
Yeah, I think they have the potential to have a really good defense, similar to Oklahoma. With when I look at their offensive side of the ball, I don't think they have a lot of depth in the skill positions. In Aguilar, he's probably not going to be as good a quarterback as John Mateer, but they have Peyton Lewis, who's got potential. Star Thompson, who Heupel mentioned out of the scrimmage this weekend. Smith's a freshman wide receiver. They've got Matthews as a sophomore, but they're just nothing real proven at the skill positions. Tennessee does always run the ball well. I love the way that they play offense where they spread you. They'll take 4 guys and go wide and spread you sideline to sideline. So it's impossible to get 8 in the box on them. It's really hard to get 7 in the box on Tennessee when you're there watching them play. So I do think with their offensive line, they've got some physical guys there, and Sanders as a freshman will probably start at right tackle. I do think they'll find a way to run the ball with some success, but it's certainly not a team that Tennessee is going to have to depend on their defense running the ball for success and winning games 27-24. They do not have the skill players to get in a shootout this year. Games gets into the 30s, they're going to be on the downside of that. But they do have a great defense.
Yeah, they do have that. But yeah, like I look at their running back room and maybe some of the freshmen, develop and but from their starters, like I don't know if I see a NFL wide receiver on this team.
Not right now. Again, Smith, that's a freshman, may turn out to be that, but there's nobody that I could look at right now and say that's an NFL guy.
Just crazy to think because Tennessee's had some playmakers over the last 4 or 5 years.
Big time playmakers. They've had some really stacked wide receiver rooms, great running backs. They've put a lot of guys in the league.
Well, cool. I think that was pretty solid tonight.
Yeah, I think so. I couldn't think of that other Tennessee running back the guy that's actually the starter.
Was that Bishop?
Bishop, yeah. But that's okay. We got through it.
Yeah.
Some
And
Tennessee
I may even edit out the Tennessee stuff because that
you
was
can.
so late.
Yeah, you
I
can.
just kind of wanted to mention with us, like, Tennessee's a team I feel like people have talked about offensively the last
Yeah. Or
while. And
if you edit it in just mentioning Bishop,
yeah,
you could do that. You could edit it in, just mention, the starting running back Bishop. That was the only thing I think we really missed. But yeah, I think both of them overall solid. We can edit them, and then maybe we can get Sweets on sometime in the next 2 nights to do his. And you've got